So I'd like to welcome everybody and say how wonderful it is to have you here, even though the circumstances, of course, that we're coming together are not ideal. We wish that we were together in times of peace and gratitude only, rather than in times of need, grief, and a need for mutual support. Nevertheless, we can say we always need to support each other, and it is always both a pleasure and a strengthening to be with all of you from around the globe. And we really are an international group today, as well as an interfaith group today, which is just tremendous. For 3 months, what is it, November, December? Yes, for 3 months, over 3 months, we have been coming together to consider the value, the dignity of the human person. And we've had teachers from 6 different religious traditions sharing with us their ideas. And I've grown tremendously from both seeing the common features and the unique teachings that each of our teachers have brought to us over this period. And Alon and I were discussing the both beautiful success of this series, as well as where do we go from here. And Alon in his wisdom said we have to move from theory to implementation and ask ourselves the question, okay, all our traditions teach us that the human person has inherent dignity. All of our traditions give us responsibilities about how we live up to our own potential in terms of human dignity and how we should treat others. There are ideals, they're teachings, but how do we implement those teachings, especially in times of crisis, especially in times when our trust of our fellow human being might be tested and our ability to think of the other and their dignity may be challenged. And in these difficult times, as well as in normal times, how do we move from the ideal to the implementation? And so I'm going to hand over to Alon and ask him to open our session. I will acknowledge before I do that Alon is going to call in our second teacher, Fr Eamon Kelly, whom many of you heard a few weeks ago when he gave a very brief introduction to what he's going to say today. And we were so honored that he was happy to come back and continue the conversation. So thank you, Father Eamon. Alon will introduce you more in a moment. But now we're handing over to Alon. He's going to open this stage 2 of this series on the dignity of the human person. So over to you, Alon.
Hello to everyone, and I suppose Happy New Year to those we haven't had a chance to wish that to. May it be a year of peace. As I mentioned in the announcement to today's session, I see us moving to a phase 2 of our series. When the war broke out, we realized that we had this challenge of how to continue offering our voice. And with the help of friends, we came up with this notion of human dignity, and we've been at it now for almost 3 months. I had the feeling that the message is fairly clear. Traditions support the idea of human dignity. We've been looking at it from different angles, rich resources, theology, ideology, values, kind of consensus exists, and we may continue contributing to it over coming sessions. The war is getting long. It's becoming quite difficult every week to come up with a program, but, one more reason to hope the war ends soon. Be that as it may, we felt, actually owe this insight in part to Sister Isabel, member of the Elijah Board of World Religious Leaders, former head of the Sisters of Bethlehem Order, who said, okay, you talk about the human person, but what do we have to cultivate in ourselves in order to realize these qualities? In other words, in what way can they become something that we grow within ourselves in order to be able to realize that? ideals are nice. Everybody can quote texts. What do we do? What are our spiritual lives? What are our spiritual aspirations that would allow us to attain this? So I thought it's time to rise to the challenge, and let's try and give a kind of spirituality process-oriented perspective on what do we do and how is our spiritual life crafted in a way that allows us to realize the ideals that we've brought to light over these past 3 months. And doing so really moves us from a kind of third-person description, what's out there in the text, to a first-person description, what works for me? How do I practice? What is it that allows me to be able to live up to these ideals, or at least to aspire to living up to them? So what are the resources, techniques, practices? Why is it that, contrary to a growing consensus currently in the media and large sectors of Israeli society, the life of the other doesn't matter, there is no dignity, why are we all here pushing for the alternative? Was it about my spiritual life and orientation that leads me to do that? What empowers me to do that? And what of that can be shared with others to inspire them similarly? So I chose to go first because, having conceptualized this task, I feel we need a model for it, of someone sort of putting themselves on the line and saying, this is how I do it, as an invitation for today's co-speaker and for future co-speakers to be able to offer a similar sharing that takes us from ideas to practices to the realization of the vision. So I'm going to go more personal today than I'm used to. Hopefully, if I manage to say something that shocks someone, that's a good sign, because then I've stretched everyone's thinking a little bit, but I hope I don't shock anyone too much. And with that, let me then move to this challenge of how to maintain this sense of humanity and how I personally have tackled it. So I'd like to begin by saying that it's very hard to approach this particular task if you haven't prepared to it previously. In many ways, the spiritual life is such that we prepare ourselves for the crisis for years and years and years in advance. And how you deal with the crisis, someone said to me recently, a Hasidic Rosh Yeshiva, head of a religious institution, he said, of the people who are having to cope with grief right now, those who come equipped with faith have a much easier time. It's a truism. It may not mean all that much, but the fact is that you deal with the moment based on the resources you've cultivated. And that's as true of dealing with crisis as it is with manifesting certain attitudes. So who you were previously will condition what tools and resources you have for approaching this at the moment. So you may change opinions, but interior formation is something that takes much longer. And ultimately, if we want to talk about the implementation and the realization of the goals of human dignity and attitude to the other, especially in times of challenge, crisis, war, then you really have to draw on resources that are lifelong. Now, by way of a second introduction, I want to say that in a Jewish context, this particular issue is closely related to one of Judaism's most fundamental concerns, the tension between what you can call particularity and universalism. What room is there for the other, for the religious other, for the non-Jew in your thinking? Of course, the question of human dignity also has to do with the side of the perpetrators of the October 7th attack and how they violated unbelievably the most fundamental human dignity, and the unbelievable situation of Israel having been brought to court just today as a consequence of this. But at the end of the day, what's underlying the whole thing is, on both sides, what is the dignity of the other? And on the Jewish side, this really goes very much to the core of an age-old issue. How does our particularly relate to the presence and the existence of the other? And there's a spectrum here, not ideologically, but psychologically, orientation-wise. Do we see the other? Do we not see the other? To what extent is the other just the backdrop or the enemy or a reality to be ignored? Or on the other hand, is our particularity, our election, our history, our being in the state to be understood as part of a broader mission with universal significance? This is a ongoing challenge. And there's definitely a correlation between those people who see us as center point and those who have a broader vision that's universal. And that impacts the view of the other. And really, everything that's been going on in Israel for the last year, beginning with the legal revolution, continuing with the war, all brings to a head this challenge of Jewish identity, Israeli identity, as it's caught between these poles of universality and particularism. And is it adequate for us to only be upholding our own more particular, more narrow perspective? To a large extent, that's what's being tested. Maybe that's what's being broken. That's what's being challenged as the need arises to see things more broadly. So that then, if I put the 2 points that I've made so far together, it raises the challenge. So why is it that Alon Goshen-Gottstein has an orientation that is broader? Where did it come from? Because it wasn't born over the last 3 months. And I think really everybody has to look at their life story. Did they grow up with people of other faiths? What were the circumstances? Do they have friends from other faiths? Very often you need one meaningful friend just to break the stereotype of our exclusivity. When we did the Friendship Project, one of the lines I coined at the time was, you only need to have one friend to make a difference. So what are teachings, relationships, teachers, sources of influence on the outside that lead to an awareness that's broader? And as soon as that awareness is broader, then of course the whole value of the other faiths, other people, humanity at large will be much broader. I recall with gratitude the comments that Sally made when she made her contribution on the session on Hanukkah and bringing light to darkness, that one of the ways of bringing light to darkness is precisely with the kind of practice that we've been cultivating and advocating here collectively, which is the practice of friendship. Okay, so with this, I want to move to teaching and then to illustrate the tensions that are in the teaching and to raise the question, so why do some people interpret things one way or another? So the basic question of the view of the other and the openness of the other to the stranger can be brought back to the biblical commandment in Leviticus 19, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your rea. Rea can be translated variously as neighbor, friend, other, as yourself. So who is this rea? And there's a kind of elasticity in the interpretation of this notion. Is the rea the one, as one rabbinic tradition has it, reacha betorah u'mitzvot, someone who is like you and observes Torah and mitzvot, and therefore it's a very limiting understanding, or is it broad and universal? And there's a tension within the sources. We have sources that are much more narrow and sources that are much more broad. So just to offer you two sources that are broader for the love commandment and its universality, and there's a Pirush Anshe Shem that's, there's a Pirush called Likutei Anshe Shem that brings the commentary that Rea has to be everyone because everyone has been created in the image of God. So that the notion of the image of God that we heard about throughout our presentations and in the Jewish context, I referenced specifically Art Green's presentation, is something that doesn't stop with the respect, but has to be extended to the love because of the other. Or Rabbi Chaim Vital, the disciple of the Ari, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the great Kabbalist from Tzfat, he has a tractate called Tractate of the Holy Spirit, where he lists the stages and degrees that are required in order to attain the Holy Spirit. And he says, love of the other, and that means love of every person, every human being, Jewish or not, is a condition for attainment of the Holy Spirit. This actually makes a lot of sense because attainment of the Holy Spirit means you're looking at the reality from God's eye. To look at it from God's eye, you have to see as God sees. God sees with the love that he offers to all of his creatures. So if you want not just to practice your religion, but to attain the Holy Spirit, you have to cultivate that capacity of love. So here's the challenge then. Here are these ideas. And then there's practices of how you apply them. So I want to go personal here and to share a couple of things that I have practiced, not as much as I'd like, and not as systematically as I'd like, but still they've been part of exercises, meditations, attempts of mine to inculcate these attitudes. One of them has been, and I've spent some time doing this. You walk around the street and you look at people and you remind yourself, this person is an image of God. So it doesn't just remain an idea. It's something that you look at and you're mindful of as you encounter people. You don't just see, oh, here's the person. And where I'm concerned, people are typically a nuisance and they disturb me. People make noise and all kinds of horrible things like that. No, you look at the person. This person is the image of God. The men among us will know that occasionally they have to struggle with the problem of the women among us and how to curb some temptations. This may take on different expressions at different stages of one's life, but it is a universal problem that one struggles with. So one of the things that I've spent some time also doing is superimposing this awareness, image of God, when you meet other people, especially women. No, you're looking at an image of God. Look at it that way. Don't look at it. The religious literature of all traditions is full of various attempts and exercises how to turn the mind when you see a woman to something else. So for instance, Hindus, every woman, don't look at her as a woman, look at her as your mother. Okay, it's a practice that people undertake, how to turn the mind to see something else. So I've been using this notion of look at the other person as the image of God and raise your mind beyond that. So I'm saying, what does this mental superimposition do to our awareness if we gradually train ourselves? So we've had so much talk about the image of God and looking at the other. What would it do, or what could it do? And I can say a little about what it has done. If we can take up this notion of the image of God and actually keep it in our memory across our encounters. Second kind of superposition meditation awareness. There's a Kabbalistic Hasidic tradition based on the verse in Psalms 16. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. I have placed the divine presence before me always. And the exercise is to take the tetragram, the four letters of the divine name, Yud Hey Vav Hey, and to just place them on your and imagine them on your forehead. And you're walking around and you're looking at reality and you're looking at God at all times. This is a very, very common practice. And again, I've spent a little time applying it. It can achieve one of two. It can achieve the goal of you're always remembering God wherever you go. In other words, there's this reality, and then now you're remembering God. So I'm walking to a room full of people, but I maintain awareness of God by doing this visualization. It can also function in a more significant way, more powerful way, by saying I'm seeing God, and therefore I'm seeing everything as God, which reminds one of another orientation that I picked up in India. In India, our Vedantic friends, going back to the conversation I had with Swami Sarva Priyananda a few weeks ago. So for them, everything is God, everything is divine. So one of the applications is you walk around and you're looking at everything and you remind yourself, I'm actually looking at God in manifestation. So you're looking at the tetragram and you say, this tetragram is the key to seeing everything as divine. So here, this is more expansive than just looking at the other person as the image of God, because it's actually looking at everything. If you remember, one of the particularities, one of the issues that's arisen in the context of our sessions is, what is it that is the image of God? Is it the person, or is everything divine? So if you practice the use of the tetragram and you look at everything as divine, then you're aware of people, but you're aware of broader reality. And that means you start to look at reality from a God's eye perspective. Looking from a God's eye perspective is probably the most efficacious means of rising above our own personality and subjectivity, because you're trying to see the world not as you see it, but as God would have it. And that's precisely what we need in order to cultivate this alternative appreciation of the human person. So this opens up, and I want to talk about prayer here. This opens up to a much more fundamental and basic, I would say, it's beyond exercise because it goes to the core of it, but what the exercise is above our forms of prayer, and what I describe as prayer is a form of exercise. So the boundaries blur. What is our basic consciousness as religious people? Are we in this world Or in some way, are we supposed to be in this world but not of it? In some way, above the world, in some way, maintaining God awareness in our lives. Rabbi Yehuda Levi, medieval theologian, wrote in the book of the Kuzari a description of the life of the Chassid, the pious person. And he talks about the fact that at times of prayer, the mind rises above ordinary consciousness. And then gradually you're in the day and you lose that awareness, and comes prayer and you reconnect. And so the life cycle is connecting, losing the charge. It's like, like the cell phone battery. You charge it, it loses charge, you plug it back in again. Prayer is the time for recharging the person or the spiritual battery. So what shapes our awareness and how much are we in the world? So one side of it is applying yourself to prayer as a means of remembering God, because the more you remember God as a frame of orientation, the easier it is for you to rise above the emotional effects, the attitudes, the responses, how the other person sees this, how the op-ed in the newspaper sees this, how the slogans on TV see it, because you're not fully in this world like they are. You rise above it in order to maintain a grounding in God, from which you have a perspective that's alternative and complementary. The flip side of it is also discipline, how much you get into this world. So I had a conversation with someone just this week. This person is totally traumatized by the war. This person left Israel. She can't take the violence of the society and the violence of the war. So she left Israel, and then she sits wherever she sits, and she's watching TikTok movies of all the violence, which then add up to her case against the war. And I said to her, look, if you are moving away from this, then move into a space of prayer. Get your information, know what's going on. But the more you get into the visuals, the more you're absorbed in social media, the more you're exposed directly to some of the horrors, the more your mind is taken over. And if your mind is taken over, you don't have that space and that ability to rise in your mind above the immediate impact of the things that you see. And our challenge is to rise above such impact. Our challenge is to know the reality adequately, but not be so absorbed in it that we lose our presence and our consciousness. So this is really a core element of the spiritual battle here. Being present prayerfully to the world, being present prayerfully to the reality, but not losing yourself in the reality to such a degree that you can no longer pray for it, identify with it, practice the attitude of mindfulness and awareness as described thus far and as we go on. So this then in turn leads to the next point, which is, how do we respond to events? How do we respond to things we see? And this is, of course, a broader challenge way beyond this particular situation. It has to do with what is a prayerful response. I'll share again something personal. I'm a total news junkie. I consume multiple websites daily. All my distractions are in the news. I'm constantly getting updated on the news one way or another. So I've been struggling a lot on how to curb that, how to use less of that. And one of the tricks that I've applied inconsistently but effectively is, before I click on the link, I make a promise that I'm going to pray for whatever I read in this particular news item. So I'm clicking, I see a piece of news. I can't click to the next thing until I pray for that situation. So I'm reading about a problem somewhere, about people, hardships, whatever it is. I translate that into prayer for that thing. So the encounter with the world, the encounter with the news, there is then an invitation to transform it into something prayerful. Okay, it's a cute exercise if you're trying to cut down on your consumption of news on the internet. But it's also a very important response when you come across things. Something comes your face, a piece of news. You hear about a hostage. You hear about a bombing. You hear about children dying in the war. You hear about disease spreading. You don't say, oh, they deserve it, or oh, how horrible. You say, oh God be with them. You translate that prayerfully so that you become the bridge between that reality and God by carrying prayer over from whatever is going on into that reality. So a prayerful response is one way of maintaining mindfulness to those things we want to maintain mindfulness to as we practice, as we engage with all forms of reality, but especially as we struggle to maintain the higher awareness in time of war, including this awareness of the human person. So a prayerful response. It so happens, I'll just tell you where October 7th found me. I was one of the first people to find out about October 7th, and it goes as follows. I'm always in Jerusalem and at the Kotel, at the Western Wall for all festivals. So I was at the Western Wall on Simchat Torah. I got there 8 o'clock in the morning or so, and I could see there was a lot of commotion because I'm friendly with the guards, who are in turn friendly with the police. By 8 a.m. on October 7th, I knew the numbers were way less, but I knew there were 50 dead, they were kidnapped. I knew the problem existed, even though I didn't know its extensivity nor the depth of the depravity that had taken place. So instead of just walking and celebrating a normal Simchat Torah, immediately there I was in the context of prayer at the wall, carrying it all into prayer. And to me, this is really symptomatic, not just of how I try to live, but what I think is the optimal spiritual response to encountering such situations and the means of elevating our mind past the horror or the fascination or the fear of whatever we see, elevating our mind to the divine response that allows us to maintain those attitudes that we've been cultivating all along, that I've spoken about previously. So prayerful response, which can, I think I've covered that point. I think one important element here, I'm thankfully reaching the end of the points that I wanted to cover, is this notion of compassion. One of the immediate responses that emerges in prayer and under all circumstances to things you encounter is a response of compassion. Compassion for the people, compassion for the situation. What compassion does, it opens up a link in us, and that link opens to God. Now, you could see compassion as a variation on love, and compassion and love flow into each other, but there's a very clear emphasis on compassion as a definite dimension of the spiritual life, as an attitude that we bring to reality. You see things that are horrible, you bring compassion. Now, you would say that you bring compassion to the victims, but compassion extends to the perpetrators as well. Because they do what they do out of ignorance. They do because of bad teaching. They do because of something in reality, in circumstances that has led people to do what they do. They may not be deserving of pardon. They may not be deserving. But if we're seeking to recognize the image of God, as the parable, if you remember the highway robber who was the twin brother of the king, and he was hung, and God. And the king says, take down the highway robber because he's made in my image. So that means that God has compassion for the highway robber, the murderer who is made in his image, which means we have to have the capacity to have compassion for all. So it's the compassion, because compassion doesn't mean we approve. Compassion doesn't mean even we love in the trivial sense. But compassion is a higher divine vision that recognizes that ultimately all creatures, in one way or another, have gone through journeys, perfect or imperfect, that have led them to where they are, where they do things, even horrible things, and it's the divine compassion that's the ultimate saving grace of all of us. We all need compassion, because what this war shows us is that everyone is capable of doing horrible things. I'm not by any means suggesting equivalence. I'm not by any means suggesting to blame, certainly not our response, but ultimately there's the capacity for doing wrong in everyone, and compassion is a divine response that helps through that prayerful attitude to elevate the others and to elevate oneself from falling into over-identification with those circumstances and maintaining a higher spiritual awareness. How much compassion you can have really is a function of, there's a kind of formula here between your own state of spiritual advancement and the impact of the situations. Little crimes, high consciousness, lots of compassion. Big crimes, little consciousness, we may not be able to have compassion. We may be too close. How can you have compassion for extreme atrocities? I mean, the rhetorical, but it's not a rhetorical question. How can you have compassion for the Nazis, for Hamas when they do it? These are valid questions. But ultimately, ideally, if we had a high enough state of consciousness, compassion would extend to all. How much we can apply is a matter of where we're situated, both spiritually and in relation to it, to the events. But nevertheless, the quest for compassion should accompany us and should guide us in how we do things. And here I come full circle to my starting point, where I spoke about openness to the other and openness to the other faiths, and what it is that why some people, myself, have a tendency to such openness. And here I think the encounter with other religions is very important, because what our conversations have done is they have led us to ask and to learn how another religion sees things. So from the perspective of that other religion, how would they respond to issues? And I remember a conversation with Anand and how he spoke about the perspective of dealing with war and seeing the divine in everyone, even in the face of these atrocities. I think about the Dalai Lama in his book that we've discussed in Religious Heroes, on our website, the review. I don't remember the title of the book right now. For suggesting that compassion is the ultimate message of all religions. And it's something that is learnable from one religion to the other. We may have our differences, but and there are significant differences, and yet there are key elements where you can always be inspired by another religion to apply something in your own tradition that you don't have adequately. So for me, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov talks about the fact that God creates the world out of compassion, and therefore compassion is the substance of all reality. And he says, you just have to look and you see the divine compassion is everywhere. And typically we don't get this good teaching on this in Judaism. We do get good teaching and sometimes in other religions. So we can cultivate some capacities and some understandings through the interreligious encounter that allows us to cultivate also these qualities that exist in our tradition, but they are ideas. And then you see people implementing those ideas in other traditions. That gives you the inspiration, sometimes the tools to apply them. Ultimately, it's the same quest: raise consciousness, expanding your awareness, seeing things from the divine perspective, going past the immediate reality to bring a higher vision to that reality. And all these different elements I've been sharing with you are part of that one broader quest. Beautiful. So what we need, to sum it up, is to raise our consciousness. Raising our consciousness, the texts are signposts, but the practices, our practices and the practices we can learn from others, are actually how we walk along the road to interiorize and to implement those great ideals. Their compassion, love, and in this case, the direct application of those ideals also to the value of the human person. Thank you.
Alon, thank you so much. Alon, I'm just going to tell Bill and anybody else who has a question that we will be giving an opportunity for questions and discussion after Eamon has participated. So Alon, are you going to call Eamon in? And
so Eamon, Eamon, where are you?
See you. You there?
Can you hear me now?
I see you and I hear you. Oh, and your beautiful white collar and white shirt. Okay, so we have interreligious complementarity. I have color. So, Eamon, I shared some of these orientations with you, and you're invited to either share your angle of how you go about sitting in Magdala, practicing these ideas on a day-to-day basis, where the people come to you based on what you had prepared for today, based on your spontaneous response. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Alon. It's good to be here with Elijah. And I'm blessed to know Alon for a long time, and Pepa almost for as long a time, and done so many things together in Jerusalem. And so I'm very happy to be here with you this evening. And I think you covered a lot of ground, Alon, in your presentation, and I thought you were almost taking the words out of my mouth. At some points along the way, especially even from the very beginning, about all our life is building up to who we are today. So I'm not sure. You gave a wonderful presentation about these very high spiritual levels, and I was coming at this from another angle. How do we talk to people who don't have that spiritual experience? And there's two sides to this, probably. One is we probably ourselves have our own challenge internally. And then we can't really appeal to spiritual motivations to people who don't converse in those terms or are familiar and working with those terms. And in a way, a lot of the conflict happens just in the daily grind of encounter with each other. And obviously, this is my 50th year in religious life, in systematic religious life, after being raised on a farm and finishing high school, heading for physics study in the university, which was my passion. My path got a little bit tracked in another direction. And so 1974, after high school, I joined the seminary. And that has been a whole education in itself. But already from before that, I had received a lot. And if we're looking for practical things, we have to look at a lot of practical areas in our society and choices that we make and our society makes on a regular basis that have become institutionalized and as part of technological world in which we live, unthinkable without these realities of media and presentations, and also the very current reality. You addressed it a little bit in looking for that peace in the heart, in the awareness of all this going on, because when I was a child, we got radio reports, and a radio report was very different than a TV report of an earthquake, because you had to imagine you didn't see the graphic nature of it. But now everybody has every single disaster on the world at their fingertips, and they can spend their whole day. They don't need to look for sensational movies because all of the reality of humanity is a real drama. And so how to process that? And then we have entertainment industry and a media production, let's say, from then not from the real tragedies on the ground, but from the Hollywood stories, and eventually now from all the apps. I study a little language on an app. It's the only little game thing I do. It's through learning at the moment. I'm trying to learn a little bit of Arabic. And there are always ads coming in because I didn't get the paid version. I got the free version. And it's amazing that just in those few seconds, the amount of stuff that's thrown at you. I always turn my phone upside down for the 30 seconds, let the ad run through, rest my brain so I come back fresh at the app. But there are games being advertised where people are being massacred, like they're being shot, they're being steamrolled, they're being rolled over. So we're living in a world that has brought the human tragedy that's universal in front of us all the time. And we're living in an entertainment world, for those who indulge in that, that's also very, very lethal to the concept of respect for the other in many ways. And on the other hand, I wouldn't like to condemn, to be negative on all of this, because there's some marvelous things that have happened in our world. There are amazing drives of solidarity to help people in a major need. A child that needs a special operation, there's a GoFundMe, a crowdfunding, and suddenly there are people from all over the world making a heart transplant possible for a poor family somewhere. We see so many different instances of humanitarian involvement. And I think there we have touchstones. If we can bring that out, a major field that impresses me a lot is restorative justice. Maybe a lot of people don't know about it, but let's say classically in the penal system, it was a punitive justice. People got punished for a certain crime, so many years in prison or such a fine and so forth. And obviously the public disgrace of being caught and punished, judged and condemned. And then we even had death penalty before, more widespread, thanks be to God, less and less widespread. And so in the restorative justice, there's an effort to bring the person back to a more normal life. There's a growing understanding for the background that leads somebody to end up in a high security prison. And I know Dr. Enright Peta was very helpful in a conference we held at Notre Dame on forgiveness. He's a a pioneer of forgiveness education in Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And he brought so many cases to us in that conference at Notre Dame, the International Conference on Forgiveness, Interreligious Conference. And the late Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Sachs, did a marvelous presentation, a Muslim scholar, and also we had Cardinal Tagle from Manila. And one of the points he made was when they brought in a forgiveness process to high security, maximum security prisoners, after they went through the process, they were able to be brought into a lower security level, which was less expensive for the state. Less wardens, less control, more freedom for the person. And what was revealed there was particularly the difficult childhood a violent person had had, the abuse they had suffered in their home or in all kinds of circumstances you can imagine. And they went from one level to another level of violence. It accelerated. And the restorative justice system, I think, is a great accomplishment. And I'm not an expert on it. It's just a concept lodged in my brain. I felt that responds so much to the biblical message, to a redeeming God who wants to save humanity and who wants to bring humanity to another level of fraternity, of solidarity, of commitment for each other, of respect for each other. And so I would say that I think people understand that. Often I find a way for addressing this theme is also biblically based, although I don't use biblical stories as much, but thinking about how the difference, let's say a juvenile delinquent, that's a term we still are familiar with. I'm not sure if it's used that much anymore, but I have it in my brain. And that kid, we call him Johnny, when he's been treated in the jail system, he's been treated with a certain harshness. The police are making sure, the guards are making sure that he knows who's in control. But if you go to Johnny's parents, they want to get him out. They want to get him transformed. They want to get him turned around. They want to, why? Because they love him. He's their child. And they know some things went wrong, bad company, or maybe there were domestic problems at home that he got a very bad input for a while. Maybe one of the parents was on drugs, whatever, all kinds of things, you know. And so how to get the child back on his feet, how to get him to finish some educational or trade qualification, get a job, find a good partner, have a marriage, settle down and become a great person. There's so many beautiful stories of this. So I think that in a certain sense, our biblical culture has provided the motivation for a lot of people to do good. And I think just in ours, I think of, she's famous worldwide, Agnes. You know Agnes?
I want to interrupt you here. In our culture and with the biblical foundation, I want to hear how Eamon has been inspired. In other words, you've given us an important understanding of context, story, narrative, having compassion in those circumstances. I want to ask you to speak first person and not to talk about other people. Tell us how you live it.
Thank you. Well, you know, the first thing was originally Peter sent me a bunch of questions. And the first questions were, what are your practices in your life that remind you of human dignity? And what I wrote down, the first line was, it's not practices, it's who I am. So I don't think about practices for human dignity in a way. And then I asked myself, how did I get there? And so instead of, let's say, how I'm dealing with it today, one of the people that came to my mind was my father. My late father, God rest his soul. And one evening, we didn't have electricity yet. I even found out the exact date because I checked it on AI, on ChatGPT. And it turns out that it was the 27th of January in 1972. And I was 16. I was turned 16 in October. And my dad was sitting beside the fireplace. The radio was on with the 9 p.m. news. I was in my pajamas, leaning against my bedroom door that opened into the big white kitchen where there was enough space for a sow to have her litter. It was, that house would be 200 years old now if it was still there. And my dad was reading the newspaper with his glasses down over his eyes. And I'm standing, and we're both listening to the news. And at one moment, Charles Mitchell, who was the newscaster, famous Irish newscaster on the single station we had in Ireland at the time, announces that today in Belfast or in Derry, the 100th British soldier was shot, was killed. My immediate reaction was, wow! I could already hear the silence in the kitchen. My dad was maybe 5, 6 yards away from me. He's holding up the paper reading. The paper comes gradually down. His glasses are out here. And gradually, as the paper goes down, his head is coming toward me. He gave me a look that seemed to me to be of total disappointment. His head turned back gradually and the paper rose gradually and he continued. He didn't say a word. And I closed the door very quietly and went to bed really ashamed of myself and had an incredible lesson of how you deal with other people. And actually there's a storyline that goes on further. So obviously, you know, I'm 16. I joined the seminary after I was 18. I was going on 19 almost in 1974, September. So, and now I'm pushing 70, like another 2 years, you know. And a couple of years ago, an Irish priest came to live here. And you know, the conversation, the banter that goes on in the community life over a couple of years, and occasionally some of the Irish topics would come out, and I would say some kind of jocose, humorous, anti-Brit type of thing. And he'd look at me with kind of a comical, you know, kind of a surprised little gaze. And, you know, it was really helpful. This man was is a man of extraordinary virtue. He turned 80 recently. He was 50 years a priest. And this went into my heart. And during the past few years, we had a guest here at Magdala. And you might know the name, it sounds familiar, Robert Lloyd George. And his ancestor was David Lloyd George. And at the end of the few days, he was here because we had a couple of occasions to chat. And one day we were visiting together in another place. We were invited by somebody else, a friend of his. And he was making tea just for him and me in the kitchen of that place. And he looked at me with great glee as he was fixing the tea. And he said, wasn't that a great thing? I'm not sure his grandfather, great-grandfather did for Ireland. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, the 6-county division to bring peace in Ireland. And I said, what do you mean? I hadn't understood that, but he left a book to me that he wrote about the friendship between David Lloyd George and Winston Churchill. And I have to tell you that at this stage in my life, a good 50 years, more than 50 years since that moment with my dad, I'm still growing. And I missed out because I'm a missionary priest, so I'm outside of Ireland since 1976, except for home visits. So I missed all the redoing of Irish history in the later anniversary of 2016, for example. But in 1966, I was 11 years old, not yet 11, 10 going on 11. And in Easter 1966, we had the 50th anniversary of the 1916 uprising against English domination and occupation in Dublin, right smack in the middle of First World War, when tens of thousands of Irish were in the British Army. And the Irish rebels rose up, and then they were executed. And these were our heroes when I was 10 years old, more than heroes than the football players that we loved. The Irish football players, the Irish hurling players, the great heroes in Ireland at that time for the kids. And they were in the schools. There were posters with all their pictures and their story, and we learned all about it. All that year was a year of great nationalism. And we participated. We even went out to our fronts, the crossroads in front of our farm, and greeted with a salute the president when he went by. We were waiting for half an hour until he passed by. And all of this nationalism had an impact on me and also colored my relationship. And when I finished reading the book of Lloyd George and Winston Churchill's friendship, I learned something that I hadn't understood before about the nature of politics. And I've talked to a lot of politicians in my life as a religious person, and because of the work I do and so forth. And I just understood the great challenge and the difficulty of politics and finding solutions for conflictive regions. And I would say that I have continued to grow. And then another thought I wrote down.
Can I focus this? Because I think you're going someplace really good, because Ireland and our part of the world are really good parallels. And we've heard about your father's look. I wish I could give sometimes people one look like that will be so transformative and send them in their pajamas to bed feeling guilty. And similarly, we've heard about the impact of this particular book. But you're just saying a priest now, or at least in the community, for 50 years.
Yes.
What's been the religious training that's empowered you? Well, has the teaching. What were what about your religious life has successfully allowed you to broaden and to deepen your gaze on the other?
Well, maybe first of all, living in a community. A community I didn't choose. When you get married to your beautiful wife, Therese, you chose each other, said yes to each other, but one day my superior can be changed and the new community members come and others go, and they're not all the same and they mightn't all be congenial, and they definitely have coming from different cultures. We have maybe in a community, we're just 12 people here in the Holy Land, and we probably have 7 or 8 countries represented, and we're one community. So you have to start learning to deal with the other. And you learn that since you're a child, because your sibling comes along. I'm the oldest of 5. And then you learn it with your in-laws and with your family, with your extended family, grandparents and everybody. So it's a whole, there's a whole education happening in encounter. I think one of the big words here for us has to be encounter with the other. And we have that famous Native American expression of walking in the moccasins of the other to understand them. Because how do we understand the other? And then it's discovering the other. And this is very much also biblical, really, but you almost don't need the language in the secular society. It's learning to understand the side of the other. And I think we're all learning it. We're all challenged every day. There was a beautiful question that Peter had here about the religious practices every day. And I said, well, it's before there's prayer, it's a constant struggle how to relate to the other guy who's an imago Dei, who's an image of God in front of me, and could be a fellow priest in the same community as me. And so in a certain sense, my whole life is an exercise of human dignity, which doesn't start with the other. It starts inside me, who I am. And all of our religious training, our growth in the prayer life, and our life totally dedicated. I have a vow of poverty, so I don't own any money since 1974 personally. I have a vow of chastity, so I'm not building up relationships of that nature. I have a vow of obedience. I can be sent anywhere that my superiors deem fit and needed. Obviously, they will ask me if I'm ready, but I've never said no to the changes that have been proposed to me, and I've accepted right away. So I had another very important experience, and I was in Manhattan for 9/11. And I was supposed to do a retreat that night near Times Square for a group of professionals, young professionals. And I wasn't able to get into the city, but I had some connections the next day got me in. And I was there 3 days on the streets with the people. All the entire division between people disintegrated. Just like all the bitter division between Israelis prior to October the 7th took a pause, a time out. And you saw the most diverse people talking to each other on the streets of Manhattan in 9/11. There's something that happens when there's a forest fire that say that predators do no longer attack the other animals. There's a ceasefire. And 9/11 was such an experience in that sense. It wakes up people to discover that the other is a person, that the other has an intangible value. Another encounter I had that was very special, I still remember, I was in the public bus in Rome. I was heading to do a youth activity with a confrere who was probably 5 or 6 or 7 years older than me. His name was Joaquin Saldana. I still remember his name. He didn't continue on this track. He had found another way to develop his life. And we were talking, and I said, we could use this person to do this. And he looked at me, he stopped me in my tracks. He said, you never say use a person. It's very common in American English today to use people. You can use a hammer, you can use a cell phone, you can use a car, you can use AI, chat GPT, but you cannot use a person because a person is not a usable. And we have become a culture today, you could almost call it an anti-culture, where we can dispose of people. Not only use them, we can neutralize them. And this is in the games, in the video games, it's in the apps, it's in the reports we see, it's so widespread. So I think here we have an issue about education also, the vocabulary we use, because human dignity is not just about Gaza and Belfast and the IRA and the explosions and terrorism and narco traffic, of course, at this huge level. But what can you do? What can I do for human dignity is the way I treat my family, the way spouses treat each other. The way my parents treated each other, our experience as children was amazing. And there you have two people that are so different. My dad was a townie. He'd become a carpenter. He'd worked in England. My mother was a country girl. She'd become a primary school teacher. And a woman and a man, what's more different? And the respect they showed and modeled and lived authentically. And we could tell that there were tensions sometimes, but the way they carried them, the way they carried themselves, that was much more education than having done a doctorate on human dignity. My uncle and two aunts were in Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Manila, in one of the poorest areas where people were thrown out of the downtown city, poor people to live on a hillside. And we were getting their newsletters, their reports throughout the 60s. All of these stories helped us to realize that there are others that are very different and in need. And I went to Michigan on an internship, and I was in a grade school one morning at lunchtime, late morning, organizing activities for the children. And one kid came with this beautiful sandwich wrapped in tinfoil with all kinds of goodies in it. And he opened it and he said, yuck. And he tossed it in the garbage bin, went up to the shop, bought some type of chips and some Coke. And I said to him, I said, what about the poor children? And he said to me, oh, please go over there. It's in the garbage and nobody touched it yet. Take it out and send it to them. Such a callousness, but this is where our culture is. So do we stop people in their tracks in a nice way that wins them, like this theology student, I was a philosophy student at the time, stopped me in my tracks. Human dignity is every day, in every encounter, in every person who wrongs me. We cannot take offense to human dignity because it hurts me deeply and it hurts you deeply. And the perpetrator is the first loser of his own identity and richness as a person. The first injured person is the perpetrator. Because the person who's hurt is a victim, but they didn't do the moral damage that the perpetrator does to themselves, maybe unbeknownst to themselves.
So, Eamon, this is just, you've given us, first of all, I have to say, I've learned more about you today than in all the years we've known each other. And we discovered several things in common. First of all, I'm also the eldest of 5. And secondly, my mother also brought us up about the starving children in Africa. So these lessons, but I want to leave a few moments, and this is why I've drawn you. I wonder whether, Tali, bring Alon back in. And this is an opportunity for other people in the group. Bill made a comment or a question. Bill, because I can't see all the people, if you're still there, I wondered whether you would like to pose your question in person to both Alon and Eamon. And anyone else would like to make a comment? If anybody else, just raise your hand. Tali, could you bring Bill in, please? And then.
Yeah, so just very, very briefly, it strikes me that in order to see the divine in the other, and particularly the other that we despise, we have to be open to seeing ourselves as an other and to seeing ourselves as a despised other. Our inability, language of perpetrator and victim, however descriptive and at times important it feels to me, are words that are fraught with an inability to look at another person as they and see ourselves as they are seeing us. So I'm just wondering, you know, how do we move from being so gracious that we say, oh, I see the divine in you, even though I despise you, to understanding that we might be, in fact, that other person, that same despised person, that someone else is struggling to see the divine in us.
So we need a good Hindu-Lutheran balance here, with the Hindu side offering the dimension of recognizing the divine, and the Lutheran side just recognizing how much of a sinner I was. And Bill, you're talking about complexity. So we've got complexity in our very being, each and one of us, as we're aware of, between dimensions that are just those two extremes, the depth of weakness and neediness and sinfulness, and the extremity of the divine reality. I don't think any of this can be undertaken without that self-awareness, because otherwise, without self-awareness, you don't grow. And self-awareness includes self-awareness just of that. So thank you for bringing that in.
Thank you. Eamon, did you want to make a comment on Bill's?
Well, I just resonate. I mean, it's just another very valid contribution to the aspect. And in a certain sense, I did my confession about some of the difficulties that, and I would say that I'm still a work in progress. And the work of human dignity is a continual learning. And the more people, and that's one of the beautiful things I love about what you're doing at Elijah and so many other wonderful, and there's people overseas don't realize how much activity there is between Jews, Christians, and Muslims here in Israel, in the Holy Land, and also it's a big challenge, and it's a big educational process. And I think this is happening all over the world as well. And to learn this and to help families to enter into this. This is very important in the educational system of how we articulate our culture and our future.
Well, something that I heard from both of you today was about self-education, learning to learn from the experience, having the ability to reflect. Both of you said something about giving yourself the tools to be reflective and creating those opportunities to be reflective. And I think this is something wonderful, and it's also a beautiful segue into the prayer part of our gathering today, because as you both know, but maybe not everyone on the call realizes, that the Hebrew word for prayer is a reflexive verb, litpalel. You do something to yourself when you pray. So this is also, Alon talked about prayer as a way of helping him maintain his sense of, excuse me, Alon, I'm paraphrasing you, but maintaining your sense of dignity and helping you to move and see the dignity in the other. You mentioned prayer, and of course, this is something that we do at Elijah. Martha wanted to just make a brief comment or ask a question, but Martha, it's going to have to be quick because we are then moving into prayer. So please, you unmute and make your question or comment, and then we'll move into prayer. You're muted. No, we're not getting an unmute. We have a raised hand, but it's still muted. So what I'm going to do then, Tali, we'll move into prayer, and I'm going to ask you to find. Oh yes, Eamon. Sorry, did you want to say something more?
Yeah, just Peter, I want to excuse myself in a few minutes. I still have a little time here, but I have a live stream mass at 6:30, so I will be excusing myself about 6:15, 6:20. Thank you for inviting me. It's been enriching, and I hope it's a blessing for everybody who's participating.
Thank you. It is indeed. Thank you. So I'm going to ask Tali if you could please find Heather, Fawzia, and Hannah, and bring them into the picture, because they're going to offer our prayers today. All of them, Heather, Fawzia, and Hannah, are integral to praying together in Jerusalem. Hannah in person, whenever we're gathered. She's been there since the beginning. And Heather many, many times, and Fawzia many times. And we've had the pleasure of seeing you both in Jerusalem, also at the Elijah Summer Schools. And it's great to have you all here. And I'm happy to remove myself from the picture and allow you three wonderful women to take the floor. Perhaps we should do it in historically reverse order. Fawzia, then Heather, then Hannah. We'll go from Islam to Christianity to Judaism. Is that all right? So take me out, Tanya. I don't need to be here. We'll let the other three lead the prayers. Fawzia, you first.
Greetings, good morning from Toronto. Salam alaikum, shalom. So I just wanted to do a very short reflection and then share a prayer. So as each week is passing and the situation for civilians caused by this war becomes worse and worse, that which is most challenging every time, the images come to me, is to learn about the children and the mothers. The despair in the eyes of the children, as all of you may have seen too, is just shocking. It's unbearable. It's just unrelatable, really. Observing from here, though, as a Muslim, I see my Muslim brothers and sisters going through this situation, and I am amazed at the resilience of these mothers and children, specifically the religious and spiritual resilience. In every example of a traumatic situation that I look at, the mother responds with Allahu Akbar, meaning God is greater than whatever it is that I am around. God is greater. She doesn't despair. She says, Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil. Perhaps you may have heard that in some of the witnessing, the videos, and they keep saying, Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil. This is the phrase that all the people there are saying. And what does that phrase mean? They are saying that God is sufficient for me, and He is the ultimate trustee, the best disposer of affairs. And this is the phrase that all the people of in this war, that's what they're saying. Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil. So in their alienation, feeling alone, alienated from the rest of the world, often feeling abandoned by the rest of the world because, they may not have access to news or whatever. That's what they're saying. Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil. God is sufficient for me, and He is the ultimate trustee, the best disposer of affairs. So looking at their faith and their conviction that God is there for them, He is always there for them. This is so encouraging for me and for, I think, believers everywhere, that if these people in these situations that they're in can say this, how much can it help our own faith in God, that He is indeed the best disposer of affairs and the ultimate trustee in each one of our lives and for the world He has created. And we must have trust in that. So having said that, I would like to just, do that which I do most of the time, and perhaps that it's okay to do the same thing. So I have my rosary, and I'll repeat with you, and you may feel comfortable or not to repeat yourselves also the name of God, Al-Wakil, which is this word that is in this phrase from the Quran. God is sufficient for me, and He is the best disposer of affairs, the ultimate trustee. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Ya Allahu, Ya Wakil, 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 Ya Allahu, Ya Wakil. Sadakallah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for Peter for asking me to do this. It's a real privilege to be able to pray in this group. So I wanted to describe how I came to write the prayer that I've written. I was having a conversation with a very old friend of mine here in the UK last week, and is often the case just now. We spent some time talking about the war. And the conversation went, as many of these conversations have done, with my friend making comments that began with, they should just, they think that. And I found myself wanting to say, but how do you know? You aren't there. You aren't them, whoever the particular them was that was under discussion. And I was thinking that my friend's views came from being steeped in a particular culture that's arisen from a historically Christian country. And then I thought, well, every one of us is a product of our own culture, and it can be really difficult to understand how that culture is actually affecting us, to recognize what's coming out of us that is actually from that culture. And so some of you may have heard the problem put like this: only a highly unparochial fish knows that water is wet. My friend is lovely, by the way. She just wants peace like everyone else. But it's that culture that makes our conversation so difficult, and it's why these kinds of groups are so important, because sometimes we might use the same word, but we don't mean the same thing by it. And I was thinking that that's one of the reasons that Jesus said, do not judge, so that you may not be judged, because we're never in a position to make really well-informed judgments. And maybe a more fruitful approach is to focus our efforts on seeking God and letting all that God is infuse our very being and inform all our relationships. And so it's those reflections that have led me to this prayer. God of love, of mercy, of justice, of peace, turn our thoughts continually to you. Be the ground of all our being, of all our relationships. May we never encounter another without your presence as the third person at our meeting. Teach us to listen, to hear the joys and pains that make another feel, think, and believe. Teach us to respect, and above all, teach us not to judge, but to be continually open to hearing another point of view. Instead of our judgment, we ask for your restorative judgment that brings us into right relationships, that restores peace. May God bless us in our praying with hope, in our dreams with vision, in our waking with calm minds, in our souls with the Spirit's friendship, this day and all the road ahead. Amen.
So I too thank you, Peter, for inviting me again to participate in this holy endeavour. And thank you for all the profound words that were spoken today, and very, very meaningful. I thought I would share a personal song that I read a translation, an improvised translation of some Yiddish words. The Yiddish words weren't so meaningful to me. I happened to see the translation and I thought, oh my God, this is just for me. It encapsulates my profound desire for peace. And here it is. It's one line, but I'll sing it twice. If my voice were louder, and if my body was stronger, I would tear to the streets shouting, peace, shalom, salam. If my body was stronger, and if my voice were louder, I would tear to the streets shouting, peace, salam, shalom. So to lead into the prayer of the mothers, that is more, if my body was stronger, it's more a prayer of a grandmother, right? But this I'm going to share with you, the prayer of the mothers, which was written by Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum and Sheikha Ibtisam Mohammed. And it was so meaningful when they wrote it, and it's unfortunately just as pertinent today. God of life, you who heals the broken-hearted, binding up our wounds, please hear this prayer of mothers. You did not create us to kill each other, nor to live in fear or rage or hatred in your world. You created us so that we allow each other to sustain your name in this world. Your name is life. Your name is peace. For these I weep, my eye sheds water, for our children crying in the night, for parents holding infants, despair and darkness in their hearts, for a gate that is closing. Who will rise up to open it before the day is gone? With my tears and with my constant prayers, with the tears of all women deeply pained these harsh times, I raise my hands to you in supplication. Please, God, have mercy upon us. Hear our voice that we not despair, that we will witness life with each other, that we will have mercy one for another, that we will share sorrow one with the other, that we hope together one for another. Inscribe our lives in the book of life. For your sake, our God of life, let us choose life. For you are peace, your world is peace, and all that is yours is peace. May this be your will, and let us say, Amen. Thank you.
3 amazing women offering 3 fantastic prayers. Thank you so much. Tali, could you give us the gallery view now, please? Because I'd like us to have the last moments together where we see each other, everyone who's in the group. And we take this moment together, all of us. At this moment, I've had in the chat, both in that all of you have seen, and some personal messages, gratitude for the speakers, the teachings today, to Alon and to Fr Eamon and to the prayer leaders. It's been greatly appreciated, and I've greatly appreciated both the teachers and the prayer leaders for their inspiration. And I feel so privileged to be able to be part of this community. So let us take a moment in silence together, appreciating each other and appreciating in gratitude for the fact that we are free and able to be together and pray together, and with a prayer that everybody could have the privileges that we're having. Let's take this moment together. Thank you for being with us today. We will be back together on Zoom next week, and we hope you will all join us and spread the word for others who'd like to also receive inspiration from wonderful teachers and join us for praying together. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to all. Jen, you wrote this note in the chat. Tell me, who are you?